Each week, American History TV's American Artifacts visits museums and historic places. And up next, we travel to Philadelphia's Independence National Historical Park to learn about Congress Hall, the meeting place of the U.S. House and Senate between 1790 and 1800. Our guide is Park Ranger Matthew Ifill.
Well, we're in the Senate chamber here at Congress Hall in Philadelphia. Here in Philadelphia, we have our very first treaty approved by the Senate, which is the Jay Treaty, and that led to the big fight in the House of Representatives over whether or not to pay for it. But over that same issue, we have the first rejection of a presidential nominee by the Senate. John Rutledge, who is actually a signer of the U.S. Constitution, actually one of the players in creating that Constitution, is one of Washington's first choices for the original 6 justices on the Supreme Court. He actually accepts, but then resigns the post without ever really having served on the Supreme Court. He will later become the Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court. When John Jay, who was the first United States Supreme Court Chief Justice, resigns, he's elected governor of New York. He leaves the post of Chief Justice. That leaves it empty. Washington will eventually tap John Rutledge of South Carolina. Rutledge will come back to Philadelphia this time and actually serve as Chief Justice. However, he is appointed during a recess of Congress. And so technically the Senate hasn't confirmed him, but he actually serves a session of the court as Chief Justice and leads them through some cases. When the Senate comes back later that year to return to session, they then take up the question of approving John Rutledge. Now, George Washington's never had anyone rejected that he's appointed, so this has never happened in our young history. Well, John Rutledge has a couple of things going against him. Number one, there are guys in the Senate that think the guy's a little crazy. He's definitely had some kind of strange things that he's had to say at different times in the years of the 1790s. So he's got a bit of a kind of reputation among some people, but also where he's going to get into trouble is he made some very pointed comments about that Jay Treaty that was negotiated by his predecessor. He was very critical in some speeches, and they tended to be a bit sort of rambly speeches. He was very critical, some of the things he said about the Senate itself, which, of course, senators would read the newspapers and they would read what the South Carolina Supreme Court Chief Justice had to say about them, and when he actually came in front of them, they would remember these sorts of things, and then they would decide then that perhaps this guy is not the best choice to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So they, even though he'd actually run the court for a little while, he was kind of sent packing and back home. So the very first rejection of a presidential nominee. So again, here in Philadelphia, you're seeing the Constitution in a lot of different directions being explored and used for the first time. And of course, you go through our history and you see other occurrences where this happens. And so we're able to today look at a room that's much smaller than the Senate today, but the senators who sat here pretty much do the same things as the senators in Washington today.